A judge ordered that an elderly woman be separated from her granddaughter, but when the girl began to testify, everyone was in shock. The sun was beginning to climb behind the cramped houses of Villa Santa Clara, turning the peeling walls and corrugated metal roofs to a warm gold. That morning, Emily was already up before the rooster crowed, just as she did every day. Age weighed on her knees, but her heart stayed young whenever her reason to rise was named Sophie. The 7-year-old came sprinting through the house, her school uniform all rumpled and her hair still in tousled curls. "Grandma, have you seen my drawing notebook?" Emily, dish towel tossed over her shoulder, nodded toward the kitchen chair. "It's under the kitchen chair, sweetheart. Go brush that hair, or your teacher's going to think you wrestled with a scarecrow." Sophie laughed out loud, a light, joyous laugh that filled the house with warmth. Emily smiled too, but inside she felt a sharp pang of sadness. She knew that laugh was her most precious treasure. Life had never been easy. After her husband passed away, Emily took on everything herself. When her son and daughter-in-law died in a car accident, the pain was unbearable. But there was no time to grieve when a little granddaughter needed protection. Mornings were always hectic. Emily made coffee, brushed Sophie's hair, checked that her notebooks were packed in her backpack, and walked her to the school gate. Every single day, as she watched Sophie step through those gates, she'd press a hand to her chest and murmur a prayer. That day, however, the prayer got stuck in her throat. Returning home, she found a white envelope slipped under the door. The courthouse seal stamped in the corner was enough to send her heart racing. With trembling hands, she sat down on the wooden living room chair and opened it. Her eyes skimmed the formal wording, but one sentence stabbed her like a knife. Petition for permanent custody of minor Sophie Parker by her paternal aunt and uncle, Vanessa and Michael. She sat motionless for long minutes, the paper quivering between her fingers. The only sound in the house was a bird chirping out in the yard. It felt as if her world were collapsing all over again, just like the days she learned of her son's death. Vanessa and Michael, the same ones who only showed up at the funeral, the same ones who never visited Sophie, never called, never asked if she needed anything. Now they claimed they wanted custody, claimed they could give her a better life. Emily felt a surge of anger, not because she feared losing material comforts, she'd never had much of those, but because she knew Sophie was more than an obligation or a charity case. Sophie was her world, her blood, her purpose. Mustering all her courage, she went to Sophie's room and grabbed the photo album. She leafed through its pages slowly. There was the first time Sophie rode a bike, without training wheels, beaming with pride. The first school festival in June, dressed as a country girl. Her 5th birthday, with a homemade cake and a crooked candle on top. Emily knew she couldn't face this fight alone. The next day, she went to Sophie's school and spoke with the principal. Then she visited the local family services center, where a social worker who'd helped her years before was now stationed. At every step, she felt like she was battling an invisible giant, but her eyes stayed as firm as someone who refuses to give up. That evening, Sophie found her sitting on the couch, clutching the same envelope. "Are you okay, Grandma?" Emily forced a smile. "I'm fine, my angel. Just some boring paperwork Grandma has to handle." Without a word, Sophie hugged her. It was as if she understood, even without really knowing. Days later, Emily was summoned to the courthouse to begin the custody process. Standing before that grey building, with its imposing columns and cold metal letters spelling Judicial Branch, she felt small. Her legs trembled. Her heart pounded like a war drum. But when she glanced down at Sophie, tiny hand wrapped in hers, Emily took a deep breath. The little girl looked up at her with wide, trusting eyes. "It's going to be okay, right, Grandma?" Emily squeezed Sophie's hand and replied, her voice thick but steady, "It sure is, sweetheart." Because Grandma's love for you is stronger than anything in this world. And with slow but determined steps, Emily climbed the courthouse steps, ready to fight until the very end. The courtroom was cold, not just from the air conditioning, but from the heavy atmosphere that hung over the room. In the rows of straight-backed chairs, serious faces and tense stares were fixed on the center, where the parties waited for the hearing to begin. Emily sat beside Jason, the attorney who had agreed to defend her out of empathy and conviction. He was a young man with an observant gaze and a calm voice. You could tell he didn't see this case as mere work. There was something personal in his commitment to the fight. Opposite them sat the aunt and uncle. Vanessa wore an expensive dress, her hair impeccably styled, and her expression carefully measured. Michael, sober and restrained, kept his eyes on the judge as if this were just another business meeting. Between them sat their lawyer, a man in a dark suit with sharp words and a practiced smile, a well-trained predator. Judge Catherine Vasconcelos entered the room. Everyone rose. Her gaze was direct, no nonsense, the kind of woman who saw past rehearsed arguments. Today's hearing concerns the petition for custody of minor Sophie Parker, currently in the care of her maternal grandmother, Emily Thompson, she began, her voice firm. We will hear from the parties. The aunt and uncle's lawyer was the first to speak. He rose with poise and began to address the court as if on a stage. Your Honor, we face a delicate situation. My clients, Vanessa and Michael Parker, desire only the best for their niece. They are stable individuals, financially secure, with an ideal environment to ensure the child's promising future. The current guardian, though well-meaning, lacks the financial, medical, and social resources to support the minor's healthy development. This is a matter of responsibility, not affection. Emily clutched her hands in her lap. His words cut deeper than she would admit. But Jason lightly touched her arm, signaling that her moment would come. Ms. Emily, would you like to make a statement? The judge asked. She stood with difficulty, but without hesitation. Her eyes glistened, yet her voice was surprisingly steady. Your Honor, I may not have money. I don't own a house with a pool, nor can I buy expensive toys. But this girl is my life. I rock her when she has a fever. I know the smell of her hair when she wakes up. I know she loves guava jam on her toast and that she's afraid of thunder. They don't even know those things. A hush fell. For a few seconds, only the hum of the air conditioner and the soft scratch of pens on paper could be heard. The judge watched her attentively. She is my granddaughter. I am not perfect, but everything I do with love. Jason didn't need to add a word. Emily had said it all. And in that moment, Sophie, standing beside a court aide, stepped forward. May I speak? All eyes turned to the little girl. The judge hesitated, then nodded. Of course, Sophie, please come forward. Sophie walked with timid but determined steps, never breaking eye contact. She stood before the judge. I want to stay with my grandma. And why is that, Sophie? Because she listens to me. She understands me. When I'm sad, she knows. My aunt and uncle, they don't even know I like lasagna. They don't know I'm afraid of the dark. They've never asked. Silence returned, but now it was charged with emotion. Vanessa looked away, and Michael pressed his lips together. The judge studied the aunt and uncle, then looked at Sophie and, in a gentle voice, thanked her. Thank you, dear. You may return to your seat. Sophie went back, her heart lighter. She had spoken her truth. At the end of the session, as Emily thanked Jason in the hallway, a man approached. He was a court employee, dressed plainly. He glanced around and spoke in a low voice. Ms. Emily, I just wanted to say, there's something off about your niece's aunt and uncle. Emily frowned, startled. What do you mean, sir? I can't say more, but stay alert. Sometimes what looks good on the outside is rotten inside. He walked away before Emily could ask another question. She stood there in the corridor, his words echoing in her mind. On the other side of the wall, Vanessa and Michael left the courthouse. Their elegant poise had given way to visible tension. Their carefully crafted argument had been undone by a 7-year-old child, and now the first crack had appeared. Emily squeezed her granddaughter's hand more tightly than ever. Something told her this would be more than a custody battle, and they were only at the beginning. At the next hearing, Vanessa and Michael's defense team came ready to reclaim the ground they'd lost. They knew the image of the doting grandmother and loyal granddaughter had moved the court, so they decided to play to their strongest suit: appearances. When the judge allowed new evidence, the uncle and aunt's lawyer strode confidently to the projector screen. He switched it on and began displaying a sequence of images. "Your Honor, everyone here, take a look at the home Vanessa and Michael have prepared for the girl." The first photo showed the facade of a modern mansion with a manicured lawn and a stone fountain. Next came a child's bedroom decorated in pink hues, built-in furniture, shelves laden with expensive toys, and a canopy bed with Sophie embroidered on the pillow. "Every detail was planned with care," he said theatrically. "This isn't just luxury, it's stability, comfort, security. It's the future every child deserves." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The presentation ended with an image of the couple smiling by a fireplace, a framed sign reading, "Family is everything." Emily said nothing. She didn't have to. Jason straightened his jacket and rose calmly. He walked to the center of the room, waiting for the screen to go dark. "Your Honor, with your permission, I'd like to ask the petitioners a few questions." "Granted," replied the judge. Jason approached Vanessa. "Miss Vanessa, could you tell us the name of Sophie's current teacher?" She blinked several times. "Her teacher? Oh, yes. It's Miss Nancy, retired 2 years ago," Jason interrupted. "Her current teacher is Miss Rachel. And what is Sophie's best friend's name at school?" Silence. Vanessa glanced at Michael, who looked down. "Mr. Michael," Jason continued, "can you tell us what your niece's favorite food is?" "Well, I think she likes pizza. What kid doesn't like pizza?" Jason turned to the judge. "Sophie is lactose intolerant. She doesn't like pizza. Her favorite is the vegetable lasagna her grandmother makes every Sunday." "Oudri!" The courtroom went silent for a moment, just long enough for the facade to begin crumbling. "Your Honor," Jason pressed on, "with all due respect, what we see here is a manufactured image, a beautiful house, a princess room, but no real knowledge of the child. That is not affection, that is theater." The judge nodded thoughtfully and then called the next witness, the social worker who prepared the visitation report. A silver-haired woman with a steady gaze entered and sat before the microphone. She opened a neatly organized file. "During my home visits to Ms. Emily's residence and interviews with neighbors, teachers, and the child herself, I observed that, although the home is modest and resources are limited, there is a very strong emotional bond between the grandmother and the girl. The environment is one of warmth, open dialogue, and continuous care." She paused before continuing. "In my interviews with the petitioners, I noted only superficial knowledge of the child's routine. Despite their efforts to demonstrate material stability, I found no clear signs of an emotional connection predating these proceedings." Vanessa crossed her arms. Michael pressed his lips together. Their mask was starting to slip, and for the first time, they looked unsteady. Jason seized the moment. "Then, ma'am, in your professional opinion, to whom is the child more emotionally connected?" "To her grandmother, without a doubt." The judge made silent notes. Vanessa shifted impatiently in her chair, and Michael stared at his shoes as if wishing to disappear. Emily, on the other side, simply took a deep breath. She knew there was no room for complacency, but for the first time, she felt she wasn't alone in this fight. As the hearing ended, Jason leaned close to Emily and whispered, "We're just getting started. But today, the truth got some air." Outside the courthouse, Vanessa strode ahead, her face stiff. Michael tried to catch up, but she shrugged him off sharply. "You should have memorized the answers," she hissed. "You looked like an idiot in there." Across the street, a man in a baseball cap watched them, hands in his pockets. Blended in with the passers-by, his eyes followed their every move. On his phone, a hastily typed note read, "Begin checking connections. Possible concealment of information. Vanessa and Michael. Deep dive." The game of appearances was far from over, but the truth was already showing its face. The courtroom was more crowded than ever. With each new session, the case was drawing more attention, not only from those involved, but also from discreetly positioned journalists, court staff, and curious onlookers. The air felt thick with anticipation. Something was about to happen. Emily felt the weight of tension in every bone of her body. Outside, Sophie was safe with a childcare worker, but her grandmother's heart tightened at the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Jason straightened the papers on the table and, before the judge called the hearing to order, rose with a request. "Your Honor, I would like to present new evidence, recently obtained through legal and ethical means, via voluntary cooperation from a source close to the petitioners." Judge Catherine Vasconcelos gave a brief nod. "Proceed, Counselor Jason." He plugged a USB drive into the projector, and screenshots of email exchanges appeared on the screen. In the first message, Vanessa wrote to Michael, "We need the girl. The American agency only deals with complete families. Sophie is the missing piece. Without her, there's no international adoption, and you know what that means for our image." In the second, shorter and sharper note, she said, "Sophie is a sacrifice worth making." A murmur of shock rippled through the courtroom. Vanessa froze. Michael tried to mask his panic, but his eyes betrayed him. The judge frowned, immediately turning to the uncle and aunt's lawyer. "Mr. Marcos, were you aware of these communications?" "Your Honor, no. This can't have been authorized," Jason cut in firmly. "These were provided by an anonymous source who had legitimate access to Michael's corporate account. The messages have been digitally authenticated." Vanessa, until now silent, erupted. "This is a setup, a conspiracy. You forged everything. This trial is a circus." The judge's posture didn't waver. "Ms. Vanessa, control yourself." But the damage was done. Vanessa's carefully maintained composure was crumbling before everyone's eyes. Jason seized the moment. "And we're not finished. Your Honor, I request permission to show a recorded video statement from Ms. Edna Crawford, the child's former nanny, during the time Sophie spent at the petitioner's home." Granted. The video began. A simple woman with a tired face but honest eyes appeared on screen, seated at her kitchen table, speaking directly to the camera. "I worked for Ms. Vanessa for almost 2 years. I saw a lot. When Sophie stayed there, she'd be left alone in her room for hours. Nobody played with her. If she cried, they told her to shut up. One day she asked for food, and Ms. Vanessa said she didn't have patience for childish nonsense. Once I overheard her saying she only tolerated the girl because she needed her to sort out some paperwork." Again, the room fell into tense silence. The judge's expression hardened. Jason paused the video. This is the true picture of the environment where, supposedly, Sophie would have a better life. Now visibly unhinged, Vanessa stood abruptly. "This woman's lying! Lying! You paid her to say that!" The judge struck her gavel firmly on the bench. "Silence! Ms. Vanessa, any further interruption will result in disciplinary measures. Is that understood?" Vanessa sat back down, trembling with rage, while Michael slumped deeper in his chair. For the first time, Emily lifted her chin. She knew there was still a long road ahead, But this was a turning point. Sophie wasn't an accessory. She wasn't a pawn in an international adoption scheme. She was a child, and now everyone could see it. The judge suspended the session to review the new evidence. As those present began to disperse, a buzz of conversation filled the hallways. Vanessa, once untouchable, was now the target of disdainful and suspicious glances. In the courthouse parking lot, Jason spoke quietly to Emily. "This is just the beginning. If we can link these emails to an international adoption attempt for financial gain, we've got a much bigger case, and I think there are more people willing to talk." Emily looked up at the overcast sky and murmured, "God doesn't sleep, Counselor Jason. He's just waiting for the right moment." And that moment was beginning to arrive. The courtroom was more packed than ever. With each new session, the case drew more attention, not just from those directly involved, but also from discreetly positioned journalists, court staff, and curious onlookers. The air felt electric, as if something was about to break. Emily felt the tension in every bone of her body. Outside, Sophie was safe with a childcare attendant, but her grandmother's heart tightened with the uncertainty of what was coming. Jason straightened the papers on the table, and before the judge called the hearing to order, stood with a request. "Your Honor, I would like to introduce new evidence recently obtained through wholly legal and ethical means, thanks to voluntary cooperation from a source close to the petitioners." Judge Catherine Vasconcelos gave a curt nod. "Proceed, Counselor Jason." He plugged a USB drive into the projector. Screenshots of email exchanges appeared on the screen. In the first message, Vanessa wrote to Michael, "We need the girl. The American agency only finalizes adoptions with complete families. Sophie is the missing piece. Without her, there's no international adoption, and you know how pivotal that is for our image." In the second, sharper note, she wrote, "Sophie is a sacrifice worth making." A ripple of shock ran through the courtroom. Vanessa froze. Michael's attempt to cloak his panic failed. His eyes gave him away. The judge frowned and turned to the petitioner's attorney. "Mr. Marcos, were you aware of these communications?" "Your Honor, No. This couldn't have been authorized," Jason interjected crisply. "These messages were provided by an anonymous source with legitimate access to Michael's corporate account. They have been digitally authenticated." Vanessa, until now silent, erupted. "This is a setup, a conspiracy. You fabricated everything. This trial is a circus." The judge's posture remained unshaken. "Ms. Vanessa, control yourself." But the damage was done. Vanessa's carefully maintained facade crumbled in front of everyone. Jason pressed on. "And we're not finished. Your Honor, I request permission to play a recorded video statement from Ms. Edna Crawford, who served as Sophie's nanny during her time with the petitioners." "Granted." The video began. A simple woman with a worn face but honest eyes appeared on screen, seated at her kitchen table, speaking directly to the camera. "I worked for Ms. Vanessa for nearly 2 years. I saw a lot. When Sophie stayed with them, she was left alone in her room for hours. Nobody played with her. If she cried, they told her to shut up. One day she asked for food, and Ms. Vanessa said she didn't have the patience for childish fuss. At once, I overheard her saying she only put up with the girl because she needed her to handle some paperwork." Once again, the room fell into tense silence. The judge's expression grew steely. Jason paused the video. "This is the reality of the environment where they claim Sophie would supposedly thrive." Now visibly undone, Vanessa stood abruptly. "This woman is lying! Lying! You paid her to say that!" The judge struck her gavel firmly. "Silence, Ms. Vanessa. Any further interruption will result in sanctions. Do you understand?" She sank back into her seat, trembling with rage, while Michael slumped further in his chair. For the first time, Emily raised her chin. She knew the road ahead was still long, But this was a turning point. Sophie wasn't an accessory. She wasn't a pawn in an international adoption scheme. She was a child, and now everyone could see it. The judge suspended the session to review the new evidence. As people began to disperse, a buzz of conversation filled the hallways. Vanessa, once untouchable, was now the target of suspicious and disdainful glances. In the courthouse parking lot, Jason spoke quietly with Emily. "This is just the beginning. If we can tie these emails to an international adoption for profit, we've got a much larger case. And I believe more witnesses will come forward." Emily looked up at the overcast sky and whispered, "God doesn't sleep, Counselor Jason. He just waits for the perfect moment." And that moment was finally arriving. It was night. The silence of the parking garage echoed between the concrete pillars, broken only by Jason's footsteps. He was leaving the office late yet again, a folder bulging with documents tucked under his arm. He armed the building's alarm, unlocked his car, and tossed the folder onto the passenger seat. He turned the key in the ignition. The car exploded, but fate, whether by whim or justice, intervened. A deafening blast sent the car door flying, shattering glass and setting off alarms all around. Jason, who had jumped back at the last second when he spotted a suspicious wire dangling under the seat, was thrown to the ground. He suffered cuts across his body, but was alive. The hospital confirmed he'd escaped with only minor injuries, no broken bones. A miracle. By the next morning, the news spread fast. Attorney in high-profile case survives assassination attempt downtown. Emily felt her knees go weak when she heard it on the radio. When Sophie saw her grandmother turn pale, she understood that something terrible had happened. Despite doctors' orders to rest, Jason refused to stand down. He arranged for police escorts and beefed up security for Emily and Sophie. But fear was already lurking, and it would strike again more cruelly. 2 days later, as Sophie left school, 2 masked men approached quickly. One grabbed her arm. The girl screamed. Classmates scattered. But before tragedy could unfold, a third figure appeared out of nowhere, a plainclothes officer hired by Jason after he suspected the car bombing wasn't an isolated incident. In seconds, the attackers were neutralized. One managed to flee, the other was subdued and arrested. Sophie, shaken, was carried home in the bodyguard's arms. When Emily saw her granddaughter unharmed, she fell to her knees, sobbing out prayers of thanks. With law enforcement now directly involved, a formal investigation kicked off. The phone seized from the would-be kidnapper revealed cryptic messages and recent money transfers. Tracing the deposits led investigators to Michael's name. Offshore accounts, shell companies, sums too large to ignore. Judge Catherine Vasconcelos called an emergency session and ordered urgent security measures for Emily and Sophie. She also issued a restraining order against Vanessa and Michael, who were now officially under criminal investigation. In the press, the story exploded. Custody battle spirals into corruption scandal and attempted murder. Who are the millionaire aunt and uncle accused of orchestrating an attack? Justice under threat. Judge vows to see this case through. Vanessa and Michael's attorneys, under pressure, began to backtrack. Publicly, the couple went from concerned guardians to silent suspects. Vanessa, cornered, stopped attending hearings. Michael vanished from sight for days before turning up at a luxury resort inland, claiming he was on a pre-planned vacation. Amanda, the former assistant, was relocated to a secure safe house. Edna received special protection too. Back at Jason's office, still healing, there was a new energy. Outrage, yes, but also hope. They tried to silence the truth with fire, he told Emily, but they only shone more light on it. Emily nodded, voice low but unwavering. Justice may be slow, Counselor, but once it starts moving, no one can stop it. In the days that followed, Sophie was quieter. Playtime gave way to silence. Her drawings turned to monsters and shadows. Jason hired a child trauma psychologist to help her process the shock. And even in her darkest moments, the little girl still sought her grandmother's lap at night. "Grandma, why do they want to take me away from you?" Emily stroked Sophie's hair and answered the same honest truth every time. "Because some people see us as a prize, sweetheart. But you're not anyone's trophy. You're my life." Within the bowels of the justice system, other eyes began to open. Vanessa's name surfaced in other investigations. Michael's showed up in suspicious donation ledgers. And now, with an attempted kidnapping confirmed, this story had outgrown its local roots. Debates were igniting nationwide about child custody, judicial corruption, and childhood's vulnerability to power. But for Emily, it all boiled down to one thing: keeping Sophie safe. And even as the world shook, she now had allies, the law, and courage. And courage sometimes is all you need to stand firm. The gears of justice, however slow they seemed, began to grind forcefully. Emily and Sophie's case was no longer merely a custody dispute. It had become an open wound in the power structures, and those who protected those structures were no longer hidden. That was when private investigator Samuel Ford entered the scene. Hired by a group of volunteer legal experts who'd been watching the case with growing concern, Ford was methodical, seasoned, and known for his discretion. His first target, the case's complete history from its origin onward. Amid old filings and archived court records, Ford uncovered a clue that set off alarms. The original judge on the case, removed without explanation months earlier, had received a hefty transfer from a newly formed offshore company. Cross-referencing the data revealed the company was tied, via two intermediaries, to a conglomerate in which Michael was listed as an external consultant. The bribe was there in plain sight, disguised as legal service fees. The judge had been bought. Ford delivered the dossier straight to the Judicial Oversight Commission. The bomb detonated quietly, but with immediate effect. A confidential investigation was launched, and Vanessa's name began to circulate as an active influencer in the bribery scheme. Meanwhile, Jason received an unexpected contact. George, Michael's longtime accountant, called for a clandestine meeting. They met in a discreet cafe in the city's old quarter. George arrived wearing a baseball cap, dark glasses, and carrying a backpack. He was sweating despite the air conditioning. "I can't take it anymore," he said before even sitting down. "They've done things I can't hide, and if anything happens to me, I need this in the right hands." He opened his backpack and handed Jason a thick envelope. "These are records of illegal transactions, forged contracts, transfers under straw men. There are even recordings of meetings. Vanessa and Michael treated the child as a bargaining chip, a passport to multi-million-dollar deals with a European NGO. Jason could barely breathe. He knew the value of what he held. "Why now, George?" "Because the next victim is me. 3 weeks ago they told me to disappear a bank statement. I refused. Since then I've been threatened. I've moved my family, and after giving you this, I'll vanish." And vanish he did. 2 days later, George stopped answering his phone. His apartment was empty. His car was abandoned near a bus terminal. Police ruled it a voluntary disappearance, but Jason knew better. With the documents in hand, Jason spent hours analyzing the evidence with a forensic team. The web was vast. Shell companies in Switzerland, donations disguised as educational support to non-existent entities, seven-figure movements routed through tax havens and returned under new names. Vanessa, Michael, and 3 other executives were all implicated. Judge Catherine Vasconcelos was alerted immediately. The case had outgrown the family court. It now involved the public prosecutor's office, federal authorities, and international agencies. Recognizing the gravity, the judge called an extraordinary session and announced the final hearings would be open to the public. Total transparency. The atmosphere around the courthouse shifted. Reporters jostled on the sidewalks. Child rights advocates organized silent demonstrations with signs reading, "Sophie is not currency. Childhood has no price. Justice for Emily." Inside Jason's office, preparations for the final trial took shape. Stacks of documents, witness lists, audio-visual evidence organized by impact level. Every step was calculated, every word weighed. Emily, ever present, observed in silence. She knew the war was nearing its end, but also that monsters were most dangerous at their last stand. "They could still try something," Jason said one tense afternoon. Emily nodded. "Let them try. We have something they don't, the truth." The day before the trial, Sophie made a drawing. It showed her, Grandma, Jason, and Amanda holding hands under a sky full of stars. "This is our team, Grandma, and no one can break our team apart." Emily hugged her granddaughter tightly. Childhood still lived here, even after so much pain, and she would do whatever it took to protect it. Late that night, Jason gazed out the window of his office at the city lights below. He knew that tomorrow, everything would change. And if it were up to him, it would change forever. The courtroom was packed. Reporters jostled for space alongside public defenders, attorneys, family members, law students, and onlookers. The tension in the air was almost tangible. Everyone knew this was not just the conclusion of a custody case, it was the trial of an entire system of manipulation, lies, and corrupt power. Jason entered with steady steps, accompanied by Emily. She wore her simplest clothes, but her eyes held an unbreakable certainty. Sophie stood beside her grandmother, clutching a carefully folded drawing as if it contained her own ticket to freedom. Across the room were Vanessa and Michael. She tried to keep her composure, but the fatigue and the fear showed through even her makeup. He sat silently, almost invisible in his suit. Judge Catherine Vasconcelos called the session to order with a cold, determined gaze. "This hearing is public. All evidence has been reviewed. Today, we will hear the final witnesses and deliberate based solely on the truth." Jason was the first to speak. He opened a red-labeled folder. "Irrefutable evidence. Your Honor, with your permission, I will begin by presenting excerpts from the audio recordings provided by Amanda Norton, Ms. Vanessa Parker's former personal assistant." The recording played clearly over the courtroom speakers. "She'll cry at first, but once we give her a toy, she'll stop. That's how kids are. The important thing is to look like we're the good guys." With the judge under pressure, the case will speed up. Jason won't hold up. And that old woman, it's just a matter of time. The audience murmured in shock. The judge remained impassive, calmly taking notes. Jason continued. "Next, we have the video of Ms. Edna Crawford, who cared for the minor for months, describing the contempt with which the petitioners treated the girl. They replayed the clip of Edna saying, 'She wanted attention. They didn't give it. I was the only one who listened. When Grandma called, they told her to ignore it.'" Finally, Jason held up the documents from George, the missing accountant. "These are the financial records, proof of bribery, transfers to shell companies, and even attempts to buy influence in this very court. Independent experts have authenticated all of it." Absolute silence fell. Each word was another nail in the coffin of the aunt and uncle's narrative. Vanessa, flushed red, stood up. "This is all lies. It's planted evidence. This lawyer has an emotional involvement with the old woman. They must be sleeping together." A scandalized whisper ran through the gallery. The judge struck her gavel sharply. "Ms. Vanessa, be silent, or you will be removed." Jason replied in a measured tone. "This accusation is baseless. There is no personal relationship between me and my client beyond the ethical and honest practice of law. Such attacks only reveal desperation and lack of arguments." The judge fixed Vanessa with a stern look. This attempt at discrediting only reinforces the coercive profile this court has observed. At that moment, the judge called Sophie to the stand. The little girl walked forward slowly, but with her shoulders held high, small in stature but towering in courage. "Sophie, do you know why you are here?" "Yes, ma'am, to tell the truth." "Then can you tell us what it was like with your aunt and uncle?" Sophie bit her lip, thinking. "They promised me toys, but then they left me alone. They said if I cried, it would ruin the plan. I was afraid to speak. One time my aunt said if I didn't stay with them, my grandma would disappear." The judge, visibly moved, asked, "And how do you feel with your grandmother?" "Safe, loved. She's who I want to stay with." A dense silence fell over the room. Even the air felt heavier. Vanessa sprang to her feet again, uncontrollably. "That girl was coached. It's all an act. I'd do anything for this custody. Anything." The judge rose as well, her expression hard. "This court has just heard your confession." Then, with the firm voice so many had come to respect, "After reviewing the evidence presented, the testimony taken, and the publicly known facts, this court awards permanent custody of minor Sophie Parker to her maternal grandmother, Emily Thompson. The petitioners, Vanessa and Michael Parker, will face investigation for attempted kidnapping, active corruption, emotional abuse, and judicial process manipulation." A collective sigh swept through the courtroom. Tears ran down the faces of those who had followed every twist of this story. Sophie dashed into Emily's arms. Her grandmother embraced her as though she would never let go, and in fact, she never would. A few weeks later, in a simple but peaceful home, Sophie sketched with colored pencils. Jason, now a constant friend, sipped coffee with Emily and Amanda, who had moved nearby as part of this new family. Sophie held up her drawing, 4 figures holding hands beneath a big sun, accompanied by a carefully written childlike message, "Happy family." "Grandma, will it be like this forever now?" Emily looked at the drawing, then down at her granddaughter. "Yes, sweetheart, it will be." The quiet that followed, only the soft rustle of a gentle breeze against the window was heard, free, just as Sophie deserved to be. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you did, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought about the story. See you in the next video.